There are two texts called the Emerald Tablet. One is genuinely ancient. The other was written in a rented room in Denver in 1939. Only one of them is real. The real one, 14 lines over 1,300 years old, translated by hand by Isaac Newton in a document that still sits in Cambridge. The other, 15 chapters, channeled, its author claimed, from a king who ruled Atlantis for 16,000 years. By the end of this video, you'll know which parts of each one actually hold up, and the one rule that tells you how to separate them. That's the problem this episode is actually about. Let's start with the real one, because most people have never actually read it. It is 14 lines long. That is the entire text. Here it is. "'Tis true without error, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. The sun is its father, the moon its mother. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly, with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth." Its history is genuinely old, though not as old as it claims. The earliest trace we have is Arabic, a text called the Book of the Secrets of Creation, most likely written sometime between 600 and 750 CE, over 1,000 years before the Kybalion, which this channel opened with. That's the book's title, not the tablets. Inside it, the text describes its own discovery, in a crypt beneath a statue of Hermes, carved into a slab of emerald found in a dead man's hands, which is where the name actually comes from. We don't actually know for certain whether it was translated from an earlier Greek original or composed fresh in Arabic. That question is still open. What we do know is that from there it moved through the Islamic world, into Latin at Toledo, and then into the hands of nearly every serious alchemist in Europe for the next several centuries. Newton was one of them. Now, what does it actually mean? Because this is where most treatments stop. They quote, "as above, so below," call the rest impenetrable, and leave. That's a failure of nerve. The tablet is compressed, but it is not incoherent. It has been read seriously for centuries, and a dominant interpretation emerged. Take it line by line. That which is below is like that which is above. Correspondence. What holds at one scale holds at another. Whatever pattern governs the cosmos also governs you. And if that sounds familiar, it should. This is the Kybalion's principle of correspondence, arriving 11 centuries early. The sun is its father, the moon its mother. Nothing is made from one thing alone. Everything real is the product of a union of opposites. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross. Here the text stops describing and starts instructing. Take it apart. Distinguish what is essential from what is merely stuck to it. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth. And then, this is the line people skip, it comes back down. The work is not finished at the summit. It is finished when what you found up there returns to the ground and becomes useful. The alchemists had a name for this operation: solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. That is a method, not a mystery, a method. And whatever else the Emerald Tablet is, it is fundamentally a set of instructions, with the contents deliberately withheld. And what of the other, more recent tablet? In 1898, in Oklahoma, a man was born named Claude Doggins. He read adventure fiction, then occultism, then theosophy. Around 1930, he moved to Denver, renamed himself Dorial, and founded the Brotherhood of the White Temple. In 1939, 30 years after the Kybalion, he published a book, 15 chapters, which he said he had channeled, received directly from Thoth the Atlantean, translating emerald slabs recovered from a chamber beneath the Great Pyramid inscribed 36,000 years ago. And Thoth introduces himself in the text's own opening lines. I, Thoth the Atlantean, master of mysteries, keeper of records, mighty king, magician, living from generation to generation, being about to pass into the halls of Amenti, set down for the guidance of those that are to come after, these records of the mighty wisdom of great Atlantis. Notice what that sentence is doing. Before a single teaching arrives, you have already been told this speaker is a king, a magician, and immortal. The story he tells is specific. He was born in the city of Kior on the island of Undal, one of Atlantis's principal islands, and trained by his father in the temple mysteries. The Atlanteans, he says, did not live and die as we do. Eon after eon, they descended into the halls of Amenti and were renewed by what he calls the river of life, emerging with their strength restored. That is where the immortality comes from. Not a metaphor, a mechanism located in a specific place, achieved through a specific rite. Then the waters came. Atlantis sank, and only the Temple of Light on the mountain that was Undal was left standing above the flood. Thoth escaped, carried the wisdom to Egypt, and founded a colony there to preserve it. And here is the detail worth pausing on. Later in the text, Thoth tells us that in his final incarnation, he was known by another name, Hermes, the thrice-born, which means Dorial is not merely claiming access to lost wisdom. He is claiming to be the man this entire channel exists to investigate, speaking in the first person about his own life. There are no slabs, no manuscript, no corroboration of any kind. It is, in its basic shape, the same claim the Book of Mormon makes, a translation of a lost text in a lost language that only the author ever saw. So it's almost certainly a fabrication. But does it perhaps have real Hermetic principles woven into its mythical storyline? Because when you look, it isn't what you'd expect. The key of wisdom, the key of magic, the key of mysteries, the law of cause and effect, the keys of life and death. 9 of the 15 chapters are called keys or laws. That is not the structure of a myth. That's the structure of a curriculum. Tablet 11 is the key to above and below, the Emerald Tablet's own central principle, expanded across an entire chapter. Tablet 12 is the law of cause and effect, one of the Kybalion's 7 principles, taught directly. Dorial knew this material. He was teaching correspondence, causation, polarity, genuine Hermetic doctrine inherited from real sources. And it holds up. On time, his Thoth says, time does not move. Rather, we move through time. Time does not change. Rather, we change in time.
That is a real philosophical position. So, why doesn't this just work? Because the keys don't sit apart from the myth. They're wrapped in it. By the time Tablet 3 finally reaches the key of wisdom, you already know who is speaking, how long he's lived, what he escaped, and who he later became. The teaching and the mythology are not stacked, they are braided. Now, be careful here. The easy move is to say, Atlantis is invented, therefore throw the whole book away. That's exactly the error this channel refused to make with the Kybalion. Atkinson lied about his book's origins, and we said that settled nothing about whether the ideas were true. The same protection extends to Dorial's philosophy. If his Thoth says time does not move, we move through time, Atlantis has nothing to do with whether that's a good account of time. But notice something the Kybalion never did. Atkinson made claims about how reality works, propositions you can test yourself. Dorial also makes claims about what happened. Atlantis sank. Thoth lived eon after eon in the halls of Amenti. He was later Hermes himself. Those are not propositions. Those are assertions of historical fact. And for a historical fact, the only evidence that exists is the testimony of the person making the claim. Which means the protection runs out. Don't judge an idea by its origin does not also mean don't judge a witness by his credibility. When a man is the sole source for an event, his reliability is the evidence. And this witness invented his own name, produced no tablets, and was reading pulp horror while he wrote. So the verdict splits cleanly. His philosophy stands or falls on its own. His history collapses, and the claim to be Hermes is the largest piece of it. And here is the real charge against Dorial. Not that he lied, it's that he braided the two together so tightly you cannot pull one out without the other coming with it. The teaching doesn't sit beside the myth, it sits inside it, which leaves real work to do, separating what can be tested from what can only be believed, which is, appropriately, precisely the instruction on the other tablet. And now the part where this channel has to turn the knife on itself. Because we have just spent 5 minutes establishing that Dorial took real Hermetic method and wrapped it in a story he invented. That is a serious charge. So let's ask whether we have done exactly the same thing. Go back to what we said the Emerald Tablet means. Dissolve and recombine. Take yourself apart, keep what's essential, rebuild from what remains. That reading has a name and a source. Principally Carl Jung, who spent decades on alchemical texts and concluded the alchemists were never really working with metals at all, but describing, in chemical metaphor, the transformation of the psyche. It is a beautiful reading. It is also, according to a substantial body of serious scholarship, almost certainly wrong. Since the late 1990s, historians of science, William Newman and Lawrence Principe foremost among them, have mounted a sustained case against the entire spiritual interpretation of alchemy, and it is not subtle and not stupid. The alchemists, they argue, were doing chemistry, badly by our standards, but genuinely, with laboratories and records and repeated experiments, trying to turn one substance into another and meaning it literally. On that reading, separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, isn't a metaphor for the soul. It's a distillation instruction and nothing more. There is a second problem, though, and it is the one that should worry us most. Look at how short this text is. 14 lines, no context, no argument, deliberately obscure. Medieval alchemists read it as chemistry. Renaissance philosophers read it as cosmology. Jung read it as psychology. Modern self-help reads it as manifesting the life you want. Every era that has picked up the Emerald Tablet has found itself inside it.
That is not obviously a sign of depth. It might just be a sign of vagueness. A text that means something different to everyone who reads it may not be profound. It may simply be empty enough to hold whatever you bring. So the charge against Dorial, that he took a method and wrapped it in a story of his own invention, may be a charge we have to answer ourselves. Because we may have taken a chemistry manual and wrapped it in a story about the soul. The question is not whether the alchemists meant it psychologically. The question is whether it works anyway. So let's take the objection seriously, because it deserves it. Suppose Newman and Principe are entirely right. Suppose the alchemists were chemists. The tablet is a distillation instruction, and Jung found in it only what he brought with him. Does that settle anything? Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross. Sweetly and with great industry. Here is the awkward fact. Whether the person who first wrote that down meant it psychologically has no bearing whatsoever on whether it works psychologically. It's the same principle this channel opened with. A false origin doesn't settle whether an idea is true. We don't get to abandon that now because it's become inconvenient, and none of it tells us whether the instruction is any good. Which means we have to do what we always do here: ignore the pedigree, test the claim. So, solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. Does it hold up? The instruction is unusually precise, and each part of it earns examination. Dissolve first. Nothing refines without first coming apart. There is no version of this where you keep the existing structure and simply improve it. Whatever you are trying to change has to be genuinely taken apart before anything can be rebuilt. And that, notably, is a claim modern psychology is broadly comfortable with. Sweetly, gently, force ruins the work. And this is not sentimentality. The chemists meant it literally, and they were right. Apply too much heat, and you destroy the sample. Whether or not the alchemists intended the parallel, it holds. Attacking yourself does not purify anything. It just breaks it. With great industry. But gentleness is not ease. The text asks for both at once, soft and enormously effortful, and most people only manage one. And then it descends again. This is the line almost everyone drops. The work is not finished at the summit. Whatever you found up there has to come back down and become useful in ordinary life. A transformation that stays in the heavens and never returns is not a transformation. It's just an experience you had once. That last instruction is rare, and it is the sharpest thing in the text. Most traditions stop at the ascent. This one insists you come back and do the dishes. And notice what this actually is. We spent an entire episode on the Kybalion's principle of polarity, the claim that opposites are one thing at different degrees. That was an observation. It told you what reality is like. The Emerald Tablet tells you what to do about it. Dissolve what no longer serves. Recombine what is refined. Polarity is the diagnosis. Solve et coagula is the prescription, which raises a real difference between the two. The Kybalion took the observation. It did not take the practice, the actual instructions for what to do about it. Dorial did take that. 9 chapters of keys and laws, remember. Real instructions, not just an observation about how reality works. And here is where we have to be fair to him, because it would be easy not to be. Dorial is not offering nothing. He is offering real method, and he is offering something the real tablet never offers. He is offering you a place in the story. You are a child of light. You are on the path. You were meant to find this. That is not worthless. Being told your struggle has meaning, that you belong to something larger, that you were chosen. People have rebuilt their lives on far less, and sneering at that is cheap. But notice the trade you are making, because it is a real one, and it is easy to miss. Suppose you discovered tomorrow that the Emerald Tablet was a fake, not from the 7th century, but written in 1420 by a con artist for money.
What have you actually lost? A recommended technique, that's all. You can still try it. Take yourself apart gently, do the work, come back down. That either works or it doesn't, and finding out who wrote it changes nothing about whether it works. Nothing about who you are was ever resting on Hermes having existed. Now, suppose you discover the same thing about Dorial's tablets, which in fact you just have. His text doesn't only teach you, it casts you in exactly the terms we just described. And if you took that seriously, if it became the frame you understood your life through, then learning who actually wrote it doesn't just remove a technique from your toolkit. It removes the story you were a character in. And that is a much harder thing to give up. Not because you were foolish to believe it, but because you now have to work out who you are without it. That is the trade.
A method can be tested at no cost to you. A story you've been written into cannot. Because to test it honestly, you have to be willing to find out that you are not who it told you that you were. Which is why one of these books gets defended so fiercely, and the other never has to be. Nobody's sense of themselves was ever built on 14 lines about separating the subtle from the gross. The tablet never asked for that. It only ever asked you to work. If this is the kind of examination you came here for, the whole text, not just the quotable half, subscribing is how you follow it. So, is the Emerald Tablet useful?
Yes, and here's exactly why. Take yourself apart before you try to rebuild. Do it gently, because force breaks more than it fixes. Expect it to take real effort, soft and hard at the same time. And when it's over, come back down and use what you found. That is not mysticism. That is a specific, testable claim about how people actually change. And it holds up whether or not the person who wrote it 1400 years ago meant it that way. The historians are probably right that it started as a distillation instruction, heating glass, meaning gold, nothing more. A chemistry manual that accidentally became a psychology manual. Not a defeat. One of the more interesting things a text can do. And notice, we've arrived exactly where this channel started. The origin was never the point. It never has been. Dorial's tablets hold up too, in places. Real method, real correspondence, real cause and effect, genuinely inherited Hermetic doctrine. But braided into claims about what happened, not just how the world works. The rule protects ideas. It does not protect events. Test his philosophy. The man's dishonesty has no vote on whether it's true. But do not accept his history, because when a man is the only witness to an event, his credibility is not a distraction from the evidence. It is the evidence. So, the real tablet hands you a method with nothing attached to it. Dorial hands you a method wrapped in a story where you matter. Both are worth something. Only one of them costs you nothing to test. Take the method. Leave the mythology. That's the instruction on both tablets, once you know how to read them. 1,300 years old, still standing on its own, still worth doing. If this is the kind of inquiry you've been looking for, rigorous, honest, and truly open, subscribe and follow along. Every episode takes one question from the Hermetic tradition and examines it from every direction available to us.